She thought she was the law. He thought he was forgotten. But inside the walls of Ravenhill Prison, their lives were about to collide in a way no one could have imagined. Ravenhill Prison was the kind of place people prayed never to see from the inside. Its walls were tall, gray, and unforgiving. The heavy iron gates shut with a final sound that seemed to strip away a man's last bit of hope. For most inmates, the sentence was more than just years. It was a lifetime branded in shame. Among the officers who patrolled those halls, one name stood out: Claire Morrison. She wasn't just respected, she was feared. Her boots clicked against the concrete floors like a warning. Her eyes were sharp, her jawline always tight, and her rules were never up for discussion. She had built a reputation for being tough, almost heartless. Some whispered that Claire's strictness was her way of hiding scars from her past. Others didn't care. They only knew she was the kind of officer who didn't bend. To the men locked away in Ravenhill, she was judge, jury, and warden rolled into one. That's when Daniel Carter entered her world. Daniel wasn't like the others. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even raise his eyes when insulted. He carried himself with a quiet kind of strength, and that made Claire suspicious. His file said he'd been convicted for armed robbery, a crime he swore he didn't commit. But Claire had no patience for stories of innocence. In her eyes, every man who walked through those gates was guilty, and Daniel was no exception. From the very first day, their clash began. "Eyes forward," Claire barked when Daniel hesitated during his first head count. Her voice echoed against the concrete, cold and sharp. He didn't argue. He didn't even flinch. He simply looked up for a moment, gave the faintest nod, and returned his gaze to the floor. That calmness infuriated her. Most men either broke down or lashed out. Daniel did neither. "Think you're better than the rest of them?" she asked one day, standing too close, her tone filled with contempt. Daniel's reply was soft, almost too soft to hear. "No, ma'am, just different." Different. That word stuck with her. Claire told herself it was arrogance, but deep inside, it stirred a curiosity she didn't want to admit. For weeks, she made him her target. Any excuse was enough: a late step in the chow line, a shirt button undone, even the way he folded his blanket. The punishments came swift: extra duty, solitary confinement, endless humiliation. And yet, Daniel didn't break. This only made Claire push harder. In her mind, she had to prove to herself and to the rest of the prison that no man could resist her authority. Her coldness was her shield, and she would not let one quiet inmate take it away. But there were moments, tiny ones, that Claire tried to ignore. Like the day she caught him sharing his only slice of bread with another prisoner who had nothing. Or the time she overheard him whispering encouragement to a young inmate trembling in his cell. Each time, Claire shut down the thought. To her, Daniel was nothing more than another liar trying to play innocent. Still, when she turned off the lights at night and lay alone in her small apartment, she couldn't shake the way he never begged, never shouted, never cursed her name. His silence was louder than any protest she had ever heard. What Claire didn't know was that Daniel carried a truth that would one day turn her world upside down. For now, though, all she saw was a prisoner who refused to bow, and all he saw was a woman who treated him like an enemy. The stage was set for a clash neither of them could escape. And for the audience, one question lingered: how far can one woman go to break a man who refuses to bend? The next weeks in Ravenhill were a storm. Claire made Daniel's days harder than anyone else's. She assigned him the dirtiest jobs: scrubbing floors with bleach until his hands cracked, hauling laundry bags twice his weight, and cleaning isolation cells where even the air felt heavy with despair. Most inmates would have cursed her, begged for mercy, or collapsed. Daniel did none of those things. He worked, silently, every punishment absorbed like another stone added to his back. But each time he stood a little straighter. This infuriated Claire more than outright defiance. She wanted to see him break, but his silence became its own rebellion. One morning, she caught him humming quietly while scrubbing the cafeteria floor. A simple tune, nothing more. But it carried through the cold air, soft yet steady. Claire's boot stomped toward him, cutting the sound short. "You think this is a game?" she snapped, towering over him. "No, officer," Daniel answered, eyes steady but respectful. "You don't get to sing in here." He lowered his gaze, but a faint smile flickered across his face. That smile burned her like fire. The truth was, Daniel wasn't smiling because of joy. He was smiling because he refused to let her cruelty steal the one thing left to him, his spirit. And though she didn't know it, every act of defiance hidden behind that calm exterior was building a story her authority couldn't control. Other inmates began to notice. They watched Daniel endure punishment after punishment without folding. In their eyes, he became something rare inside those walls, a symbol of quiet strength. This only made Claire harsher. She couldn't allow one prisoner to inspire others. She doubled his shifts, cut his meals, and ordered guards to remind him who runs this place. Daniel bore it all, but scars started to show. Bruises on his arms, a limp in his step, a weariness that weighed him down. Still, he kept his silence. At night, lying on his thin mattress, Daniel thought of the outside world. His mother's prayers, the job he'd lost, the life stolen by a crime he swore he never committed. Those memories were the only fuel keeping him alive. For Claire, nights were different. Alone in her apartment, she stared into her bathroom mirror and saw flashes of her father's drunken rage, the man who had taught her that weakness was dangerous. It was that past that shaped her cruelty, though she would never admit it. But every time she thought of Daniel's calm defiance, a question haunted her. What if he's telling the truth? That thought frightened her more than anything. Because if Daniel was innocent, then every punishment she gave him wasn't justice. It was cruelty. The walls of Ravenhill were built to hold men like Daniel. But slowly those same walls were beginning to close in on Claire herself. And the audience had to wonder, was she breaking him, or was he slowly breaking her? The prison gates had always stood like iron giants, keeping secrets buried inside. But what no one ever told outsiders was that the real prison wasn't made of concrete walls or barbed wire. It was built from silence. Inmates learned quickly. Keep your head down, obey the code, and survive another day. Guards enforced their own kind of code too, one that blurred the lines between authority and cruelty. But within those suffocating walls, something was breaking. It all began on a stormy night when Derek was called into the interrogation wing. He'd been here before. He already knew the sound of his boots echoing on the polished floor, knew the cold bite of the metal chair and the way the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like mocking laughter. But tonight felt different. Tonight, Officer Marlene Cooper wasn't alone. 2 other guards flanked her, men who normally avoided being around when she carried out her special punishments. They leaned against the wall, arms crossed, pretending they weren't watching. Derek knew better. They were there for one reason: to make sure he didn't break her. "Sit down," Marlene ordered, her voice steady but sharp, like glass about to crack. Derek sat, chains rattling around his wrists. He kept his eyes forward. She wanted him to look afraid, to look desperate. Instead, he gave her nothing. "You think this silence makes you strong?" she asked, pacing slowly. "You think it makes you untouchable?" Derek finally turned his head. "No," he said quietly. "It makes me free." That single line hung heavy in the air. The guards shifted uncomfortably. Marlene's jaw clenched. For the first time, it was her who looked unsettled. But that wasn't the real breaking point. The truth was that Derek's resilience had begun to spread among the inmates. Word got around fast, how he'd survived nights without food, how he never screamed no matter what Marlene did. Some called him foolish, others called him dangerous, but many whispered a new word: hope. And in a place like this, hope was more threatening than contraband. One morning in the cafeteria, a younger inmate named Terrence sat across from Derek, his tray untouched. "You ain't afraid of her," Terrence muttered, eyes darting around. "How do you do it? How do you not break?" Derek didn't answer at first. He simply pushed half his bread toward Terrence's tray. Terrence frowned. That's it? Just share bread and stay quiet? No, Derek finally said, his voice low. It's knowing she doesn't own me. No matter what she takes, she can't take me. Terrence leaned back, studying him. And for the first time, Derek realized something. People were watching him not with pity but with expectation. Marlene noticed it too. She started to see how conversations would go silent when Derek entered a room. She noticed the quick nods between prisoners whenever he passed by. She felt control slipping, not because Derek fought back but because he didn't. His silence had become louder than her orders, and in her mind, that silence was treason. So she pushed harder. Night after night, Derek was dragged into the chamber. Beatings grew harsher. Solitary confinement stretched into weeks. Food rations were cut, yet every time they released him, he walked out with the same steady look in his eyes. The other inmates began whispering a name for him. The Stone. It terrified Marlene, because deep down she wasn't afraid of Derek himself. She was afraid of what he represented. If one man could endure her cruelty without bending, what stopped others from doing the same? But here's where the twist begins. One night, while Derek lay in his cell nursing bruises, he heard something strange. Crying. At first he thought it was another inmate, but then he realized the sound was coming from the guard's corridor. Through the thin gap of his cell door, he saw her. Marlene. She sat on a bench, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. Her uniform looked crisp as always, but her body trembled like a child's. For a moment, Derek almost didn't believe it. This was the woman who had broken bones without flinching. The one who took pride in watching men suffer. But here she was, falling apart in the shadows of her own prison. Derek didn't say a word, but the image carved itself deep into his memory. And something strange happened inside him. For the first time, he wondered if she wasn't just cruel, but broken too. What could turn someone into this? What could twist a person so far that they could torture others by day and cry in secret by night? Still, the code of silence worked both ways. Derek never told anyone what he'd seen, but from that night on, every time Marlene stormed into the chamber with her usual fire, Derek looked at her differently. Not with hate, not with fear, but with something closer to pity. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled her most. Because pity is worse than defiance. It's the one thing you can't punish out of a person. It's the one thing that makes even the cruelest tormentor feel small. And from that moment on, the power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the predator in his eyes. She was the wounded one. The cracks in her armor were showing, and Derek knew it. Imagine that. The woman who thought she had full control, suddenly being stripped of it by the one man she tried hardest to destroy. Would you have revealed her secret if you were Derek? Or would you have kept silent, just like he did? Comment below. I really want to hear your take. That night marked the turning point in their story, because what neither of them knew was that this fragile thread of pity would one day become the rope that tied their fates together, when her life ended up in his hands. But before that, the storm inside the prison walls was only just beginning. For months, Officer Claire Monroe walked the blocks of Ravenhill like she owned every inch of it. The other guards respected her, some even feared her. Prisoners dropped their eyes when she passed, knowing she didn't tolerate backtalk or resistance. She wore her authority like a weapon, sharp enough to cut down anyone who stepped out of line. But authority is a strange thing. It looks solid from the outside, yet inside it can be fragile, full of cracks no one else sees. And Claire's cracks had begun to show, though she'd never admit it. When the steel gates clanged shut each night and the noise of the prison finally faded, Claire drove back to her small apartment on the edge of Chicago. There, she was no longer the tough officer. She was just a woman alone in a quiet room, with nothing but her thoughts echoing louder than the keys she carried at work. She would pour herself a drink, sometimes two, sometimes more, and stare at old photographs she kept hidden in a drawer. One picture showed her with her younger brother, Mark, smiling on a fishing trip. He was the reason she first joined law enforcement. She told herself she wanted to protect others like she once tried to protect him. But Mark had been killed in a robbery years earlier, and Claire's heart hardened after that. Somewhere deep inside, she believed criminals didn't deserve kindness. They only understood power. And that belief, fueled by grief, shaped how she treated men like Daniel Carter. Daniel, for his part, noticed something most others didn't. He had a quiet way of observing people, even those who mistreated him. He saw the moments when Claire's eyes drifted, when her hands trembled just slightly before tightening into fists. He noticed how she sometimes overreacted to small infractions, almost as if punishing him wasn't really about him at all. Late one night, when Claire walked past his cell, Daniel spoke softly through the bars. "You're not as strong as you act," he said. She snapped back instantly, her tone cold. "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you." But her hands, they were shaking. That moment stuck with him. For the first time, he realized the woman who tried to break him was already broken in her own way. The other guards began whispering too. They said Claire was working too many shifts, taking too little rest. She was seen arriving early, leaving late, burying herself in the prison routine as if she had nothing else outside those walls. And truthfully, she didn't. One morning, Claire's commander pulled her aside. "Monroe, you're running yourself ragged. Take a few days off." She refused. "If I leave, this place falls apart." But it wasn't about the prison. It was about control. Here, within concrete walls, she was untouchable. Out there in the world, she was just a grieving sister with no one waiting for her at home. The cracks widened. The breaking point came during a winter inspection. A prisoner from another block smuggled in a sharpened piece of metal. Chaos erupted. Guards rushed in, alarms blared, and for a few terrifying minutes, order slipped away. Claire fought her way through the chaos, barking orders, dragging 2 inmates into cuffs. But when the dust settled, everyone noticed her uniform sleeve, torn, with a thin line of blood running down her arm. It wasn't a serious wound, but the look on her face revealed something no one had seen before. Fear. That night she drove home shaking. She downed half a bottle of whiskey just to calm her nerves. And when she finally closed her eyes, she saw her brother's face, lifeless, exactly as he'd been the day the police told her he was gone. She woke up screaming. The next morning, Daniel noticed the change. Claire walked the block slower, her voice not as sharp, her eyes heavier. When he stood at the bars and met her gaze, he didn't see the cold officer anymore. He saw exhaustion. "You ever think maybe this isn't the life you wanted?" Daniel asked quietly. She froze. "You don't get to ask me that." But the question burrowed deep, gnawing at her. One evening, while doing her final rounds, Claire lingered outside Daniel's cell longer than usual. For reasons she couldn't explain, she spoke, not like an officer, but like a woman who had carried too much for too long. "My brother died because someone thought a wallet was worth his life," she whispered. "Since that day, I promised myself no criminal would ever see me as weak again. So if you think I'm cruel, maybe I am. But it's the only way I know how to survive." Daniel listened in silence, his heart twisting. For the first time, he felt something unexpected. Pity for the woman who had made his life hell. "You don't have to live like that forever," he said softly. She turned sharply, hiding the wetness in her eyes, and walked away. But the walls she had built around her heart had been shaken, and cracks like those only spread deeper over time. By the end of that year, everyone at Ravenhill knew Claire Monroe wasn't the same officer she used to be. She was harsher at times, but also distracted, almost like her fight had shifted inward. Daniel endured her punishments, but part of him no longer saw her as just a tormentor. He saw her as someone carrying chains of her own. Neither of them knew it yet, but those cracks in Claire's armor would eventually shatter, and when they did, her life would hang in the balance, and Daniel Carter would be the only one standing close enough to decide if she deserved to be saved. "No," Ryan pressed. "You could have stayed quiet. You could have let me die. But you didn't. That means something." Tears welled in Maria's eyes. Emily looked at Marcus with newfound respect. For the first time, the line between enemy and savior blurred. The town-divided news spread fast. Outside the hospital, the town was split in two. Some praised Marcus. "Give that man a chance, he proved himself." Others scoffed. "Don't forget, he's still a criminal. One good deed doesn't erase the bad." Debates raged online. Talk shows dissected the story. Faith leaders called it divine providence, while critics called it dangerous sympathy. But one thing was clear. Marcus had forced people to confront their own prejudice. If a man society condemned could carry wisdom the experts missed, what else were people blind to because of labels and judgment? Marcus's fate. A hearing was called to decide whether Marcus's actions warranted leniency. Lawyers, judges, and officials gathered while the Harrisons sat nervously in the back row. Ryan himself appeared, still frail but determined. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, he nodded slowly. Time in prison doesn't move like it does on the outside. For the free, days pass quickly, swallowed up by work, family, and routine. But for the incarcerated, every hour is stretched, every minute is magnified. And for Daniel Carter, each day at Ravenhill was a reminder of chains he didn't deserve. From the beginning, Daniel had claimed his innocence. The robbery, the violence, the charges that pinned him as a dangerous man, it had all been built on shaky evidence and a system that didn't care about the full truth. But no one listened. At least, not until a new lawyer took his case and started digging. For months, this lawyer worked tirelessly, uncovering details the court had overlooked. Unreliable witnesses, mishandled evidence, and the shadow of bias that had hung over Daniel from the start. Piece by piece, the cracks in the conviction grew wider. By the time the appeal hearing was scheduled, there was enough reasonable doubt to shift the ground beneath the prosecution's case. Inside Ravenhill, Daniel's days of waiting were marked by silent prayers and quiet strength. He didn't know if freedom would come, but he hoped. And strangely enough, in those last few months, even Claire's cruelty had started to lessen. She still barked orders, still tried to remind him who held the keys, but Daniel could tell she was distracted, worn down, maybe even questioning herself. One morning, just after dawn, a guard came to Daniel's cell. "Carter, pack it up." For a moment, Daniel froze. He'd heard those words before, usually when someone was being transferred to another prison. His stomach tightened. But then the guard added the part that made Daniel's knees nearly buckle. "You're going home." The release process was both swift and painfully slow. Swift in the sense that papers were signed, doors were unlocked, and personal items returned. But painfully slow in the sense that every step felt unreal. The clang of the gates, the buzz of the electric locks, the weight of his old clothes in a plastic bag. It all reminded him of how much had been stolen from him. As Daniel stepped outside the walls of Ravenhill, the air felt different. Fresher, colder, almost biting. He had dreamed of this moment, but the reality was bittersweet. His body was free, but the memories of what had happened inside those walls were chains he couldn't just shrug off. Reporters had gathered outside the gates, cameras flashing. "Daniel Carter, do you feel justice was finally served?" one shouted. Daniel shielded his eyes from the sun. "Justice would have been never being here in the first place," he said quietly. Meanwhile, Claire Monroe stood inside the guard tower watching. She had heard the news. She had seen the paperwork cross her desk, and for reasons she couldn't explain, her stomach had twisted into knots when she realized Daniel was truly leaving. Part of her was relieved. Relieved that she would no longer have to face the man whose eyes saw straight through her. But another part, one she tried to silence, felt uneasy. Because if Daniel was innocent all along, then everything she had done to him was undeserved cruelty. That thought weighed heavier than the keys at her belt. For Daniel, freedom was overwhelming. He returned to a world that had changed while he was locked away. Skyscrapers taller than he remembered, friends gone, family fractured. Some wanted to celebrate his release, others kept their distance, unable to forget the headlines that had once painted him as a violent criminal. He struggled to find work. Employers didn't care about appeals or overturned convictions. They saw only a record. At night, he would lie awake on a worn-out couch in his cousin's apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if true freedom was even possible. But what he didn't know was that his story wasn't finished. Because somewhere in the city, Officer Claire Monroe was beginning a battle of her own. Her body was failing in ways no one could explain. At first it was small. Fatigue, dizziness, sharp pains she brushed off. But as weeks passed, the symptoms grew worse. Doctors ran tests, specialists scratched their heads. Nothing made sense. Her strength, the thing she had always relied on, was slipping away, and with it her mask of control. Months later, Daniel walked down a busy Chicago street, hands in his pockets, lost in thought. He passed a hospital without even noticing it. Inside that very building, Claire Monroe lay in a bed, hooked up to machines, doctors whispering outside her room. Two lives that had collided in the harshest of ways were now moving toward a crossroads neither of them could see coming. Claire's condition worsened rapidly. One evening, as she drifted in and out of consciousness, a doctor muttered words that struck her like a blade. "If we don't find a rare specialist, she won't last much longer." What Claire didn't know was that the one person with the knowledge and the will to save her life was the same man she had once tortured inside Ravenhill, Daniel Carter. And soon, their paths would cross again. For most of her career, Claire Monroe believed she was untouchable. She had built her life around strength, control, and fearlessness. In Ravenhill, she had been the immovable wall. Even in her private life, when loneliness and grief tried to creep in, she crushed those feelings under the same iron will she used to keep inmates in line. But the body doesn't bend to willpower forever. It began with small things she brushed aside. A dizzy spell during roll call. A pounding headache that left her leaning against the cold tile of the women's restroom. Sharp pains in her stomach that stole her appetite. She told herself it was nothing. Stress, lack of sleep, maybe too much whiskey after long shifts. She hid it from the other guards, forcing herself to walk the blocks like always, pretending her hands weren't trembling as she held her baton. At first, denial worked, but sickness has a way of pushing past pride. One morning, while addressing a group of inmates, Claire's knees buckled. The world spun, and before anyone could react, she collapsed onto the concrete floor. Guards rushed to her side. Inmates, even the toughest ones, stared in stunned silence as the woman who had always stood above them was carried out on a stretcher. Claire woke in a hospital bed, fluorescent lights burning her eyes. A doctor stood over her, clipboard in hand. His words were clinical, detached. "Your blood work is unusual. We're running more tests." She demanded answers. "How long until I'm back on my feet?" The doctor hesitated. "That depends. Right now we don't know what we're dealing with." For someone like Claire, "we don't know" was more terrifying than any prisoner riot she had ever faced. Days turned into weeks, test after test, MRI scans, blood panels, consultations with specialists. Each time the results came back with the same maddening phrase, inconclusive. Her strength was slipping. She struggled to walk across her small apartment without gasping for breath. The weight she once carried in muscle was melting away. The woman who once projected unshakable power now looked in the mirror and saw a stranger staring back. She stopped showing up to work. Her superiors, once reliant on her, offered cold sympathy, but quickly moved on. That's how systems work. They replace you the moment you can't carry your load. For the first time in years, Claire was powerless. Her mind returned again and again to Daniel Carter. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't shake the memory of his words. "You don't have to live like that forever." At the time, she'd brushed him off. Now, lying weak in her bed, she wondered if he had seen something in her that even she refused to admit. That her strength had always been a mask, hiding the cracks inside. The guilt clawed at her. She remembered every time she shoved him, every insult, every punishment. If he truly had been innocent, what did that make her? A protector of justice? Or just another cog in a system that chewed up men like him? One night, her condition worsened. She woke drenched in sweat, her body shaking uncontrollably. Panicked, she called for an ambulance. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, sirens cutting through the cold Chicago air. In the emergency room, a team of doctors surrounded her, speaking in quick, clipped tones. Machines beeped frantically. Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing only fragments. Rapid decline. Her organs. Failing. Need to consult. Rare condition. When she finally stabilized, she overheard something that made her blood run cold. A young resident whispered to the attending physician, "We're out of options. Unless we find someone with specialized knowledge, there's nothing more we can do." Claire's chest tightened, not from the illness, but from fear. For the first time, she realized she might die, and no amount of toughness or authority could save her. Her hospital room became her new prison. White walls instead of gray ones, IV poles instead of steel bars. Nurses came and went, their pitying smiles stabbing at her pride. She hated their looks of sympathy more than she had ever hated Daniel's silence. At night, when the hallways were quiet, she thought about her brother Mark. She imagined his voice, telling her it was time to stop fighting. And sometimes, she thought about Daniel, how he endured, how he never let her break him. Strange as it seemed, his resilience haunted her more than her illness. She wondered, if he had the chance, would he let me suffer? Would he stand by and watch me die the way I once stood by and watched him? The thought terrified her more than death itself. By the third month of her decline, Claire was a shadow of the woman who once ruled Ravenhill's blocks. Her hair was thinning, her cheeks hollow, her body frail. Each day was a reminder that time was slipping away. And then one evening, as she lay staring at the ceiling, she heard two doctors talking outside her door. She won't make it through the year without something extraordinary. But extraordinary doesn't just walk through the door. Or does it? Because fate has a cruel, almost theatrical way of connecting lives that were never meant to touch again. And while Claire Monroe lay on that hospital bed, teetering between life and death, a man she once called nothing but a criminal was building a new path for himself outside those very walls. A man who, despite everything she had done to him, would soon hold her life in his hands. That night, Claire closed her eyes, certain the end was near. But across the city, Daniel Carter received a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Carter, there's a patient we believe only you can help." The hospital hallway was still buzzing with the distant sound of nurses' shoes squeaking against polished tiles. But inside room 309, silence reigned like a heavy fog. The bed that once held Officer Emily Carter was stripped bare, its sheets pulled tight, corners tucked in with sterile precision, as though she had never been there at all. Only the faint smell of antiseptic clung to the air, mixed with the faint metallic tang of fear left behind. David stood frozen in the doorway, his chest tightening as if invisible hands were wrapping around his lungs. He blinked once, twice, but the sight did not change. Empty bed, open curtains, the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, gone. He had rushed here believing he'd find her weak but alive, clinging to some fragile thread of life. Instead, he was staring at a void. Where is she?" he whispered, but his own voice cracked, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the room. For a moment, he thought this must be another cruel trick. Emily had tormented him for months in prison, pushing his body past its limits, laughing at his pain. And yet, against every instinct he carried, he had come running when he heard she collapsed. Why? Maybe to see her broken, maybe to taste a sliver of justice. Or maybe, because deep down, some part of him wanted to prove he was not like her. But now she was gone. David's knuckles whitened around the doorframe. He turned sharply as footsteps approached. A young nurse, maybe in her 20s, with tired eyes and a clipboard, walked toward him. Her expression was cautious, the kind that hinted at secrets she wasn't ready to reveal. "She's not here," David said flatly, his tone walking a fine line between demand and desperation. The nurse adjusted her grip on the clipboard, glancing nervously past him before answering. "The patient, Officer Carter, was moved. But I'm not sure where." "Not sure?" David's voice sharpened. "How can you not know she was fighting for her life?" The nurse bit her lip, shifting her weight uneasily. "I just started my shift. When I checked the logs, her name was missing." The word sent a chill down David's spine. Missing? Patients don't just vanish. Even in the mess of bureaucracy, there are signatures, records, transfers. This wasn't negligence, it was something deliberate. David stepped into the room, scanning it for clues. His eyes darted over the bedside table, empty but for a half-drunk cup of water. No medical charts, no IV stand. No trace of the frantic scene that should have unfolded when doctors tried and failed to save her. It was too clean, too controlled. Someone wanted her gone without a trace. He sat down on the edge of the stripped mattress, elbows on his knees, hands trembling. Memories of his last night in prison resurfaced. Emily standing over him, baton in hand, a wicked grin spreading across her face as he gasped in pain. He had sworn he would never forgive her. And yet, now, in this hollow room, he found himself longing for answers instead of revenge. Who had taken her? And why? David's thoughts spiraled. Was this the work of the police department trying to bury the scandal of a female officer collapsing under mysterious circumstances? Or was it something darker, something tied to the torment she had inflicted behind those bars? The nurse lingered at the doorway, shifting from foot to foot. Finally, she lowered her voice. "There are rumors." David looked up, his gaze sharp. "Rumors about what?" "That Officer Carter, she wasn't just sick. Some say her body rejected every treatment, like something inside her wouldn't let her heal." David frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "I know," the nurse whispered. "But when I walked past this room last night, I swear I heard her screaming. Not in pain, but in fear, like she saw something none of us could." A shiver crept across David's skin. Screaming in fear. The thought clawed at his mind. Was Emily haunted by the memories of the things she had done? By the faces of those she had hurt? Or was something even more sinister at play? He stood abruptly, his decision clear. Waiting around wouldn't bring him answers. He had to dig deeper, into hospital records, into the department Emily once worked for, into every corner of her past. But just as he stepped toward the door, his eyes caught on something tucked beneath the bed frame. He crouched down, pulling it out, a small, folded scrap of paper. His pulse quickened as he unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged handwriting, barely legible, were 3 words. "He's coming back." David's throat went dry. Who was he? And why had Emily, in her final hours here, left behind such a warning? The nurse gasped when she saw it, her hand flying to her mouth. You shouldn't have that. If anyone sees." But David was already tucking the paper into his pocket, his mind racing faster than his heart. Something bigger than revenge, bigger than sickness was unfolding. And somehow, both he and Emily were tangled in it. As he turned to leave, the hallway lights flickered, plunging the corridor into brief darkness before humming back to life. Nurses whispered in confusion, but David felt it in his bones. This was no ordinary power surge. It was a sign, a warning. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. And somewhere, wherever she had been taken, Emily Carter was either fighting to survive, or already in the grip of the shadow that had come for her. David discovers Emily's hospital bed empty, learns she vanished under strange circumstances, and finds a chilling note that reads, "He's coming back." David left the hospital room with the paper burning a hole in his pocket. The words were etched into his mind, their weight pressing down on him with every step he took down the sterile hallway. He's coming back. But who was he? And why would Emily, the woman who once seemed untouchable, terrified everyone around her and crushed prisoners without a hint of remorse, suddenly crumble into fear at the thought of someone else? The puzzle didn't add up. Not yet. Outside, the night air was sharp against David's skin, carrying with it the faint smell of rain on concrete. He leaned against the hood of a parked car, trying to steady his breath. The city lights blurred in his eyes as his mind replayed every encounter he'd ever had with Officer Emily Carter inside the prison walls. She was cruel, calculating, and unshaken by violence. He remembered her laughter when he begged for mercy, the way she leaned close to whisper threats as if savoring the power she held. She was the last person he'd imagined cowering at the shadow of another. So who could break her? And if this mysterious he was coming back, what did it mean for her? And for him? David's thoughts were interrupted by the nurse, the same one who had spoken to him in hushed tones earlier, slipping through the hospital's side door. She looked around nervously before hurrying toward him. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, thrusting a small folded envelope into his hand. "But when I saw you find that note, I figured you deserved to know the rest." David frowned, staring at the envelope. "What is this?" "Her belongings," the nurse said quickly. Before she vanished, they cleared her room. They didn't want anyone to know she'd left anything behind. "I hid this." Before he could ask another question, the nurse turned and disappeared back inside, leaving him under the buzzing glow of the parking lot light. Hands shaking, David tore open the envelope. Inside were scraps of paper, all torn from what looked like the edges of hospital charts and old receipts. Emily's handwriting filled them in frantic, uneven lines. The first scrap read, "He knows what I did. He never forgets. He never forgives." The second, "Don't trust the doctors. They're not here to save me." And the last, "If he finds me, it's over. For both of us." David's chest tightened. Who was this ghost from Emily's past? This figure so terrifying she scribbled warnings instead of prayers? More importantly, why did she write for both of us? The memories of her torment came flooding back, her voice, her smirk, the sound of the cell door slamming shut. He should have felt nothing but hatred. And yet, standing there with her desperate words in his hands, David felt a gnawing sense of dread. Because if she was afraid, maybe he should be too. Determined to find answers, David tracked down an old contact from prison. Marcus, a former inmate who'd spent time in solitary after crossing paths with Emily. Marcus had been released months earlier, and rumor had it he now spent his nights at a rundown bar near the river. When David walked in, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and stale beer. Marcus sat hunched over a pool table, his tattooed arms marked by the scars of survival. His eyes narrowed when he saw David approach. "You," Marcus muttered. "Didn't think I'd ever see you outside those walls." "I need information," David said, pulling out the notes. "About her, about Emily Carter." At the mention of her name, Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "That witch? Don't tell me you're chasing after her. She ruined lives, man. Yours, mine, everybody's." David slid the notes across the table. "She's gone, vanished from the hospital. But before she disappeared, she left these behind." Determined to find answers, David tracked down an old contact from prison. Marcus, a former inmate who'd spent time in solitary after crossing paths with Emily. Marcus had been released months earlier, and rumor had it he now spent his nights at a rundown bar near the river. When David walked in, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and stale beer. Marcus sat hunched over a pool table, his tattooed arms marked by the scars of survival. His eyes narrowed when he saw David approach. "You," Marcus muttered. "Didn't think I'd ever see you outside those walls." "I need information," David said, pulling out the notes. "About her, about Emily Carter." At the mention of her name, Marcus let out a bitter laugh. "That witch? Don't tell me you're chasing after her." She ruined lives, man. Yours, mine, everybody's. David slid the notes across the table. She's gone. Vanished from the hospital, but before she disappeared, she left. Marcus scanned the words, his smirk fading into something colder. He's coming back, he muttered under his breath. Damn, she was right to be scared. David leaned in. Who is he? Marcus looked up, his eyes dark. They called him the warden, not the official one. This guy ran the prison before the prison. He had power no one could trace, pulling strings from the shadows. Guards, gangs, even officers like Emily. They all answered to him at some point. And if someone crossed him, they didn't last long. David's stomach churned. So Emily worked for him? Marcus shrugged. More like with him. But she got greedy. Thought she was untouchable. Word is, she double-crossed him. And if the warden is really coming back, she's as good as dead. The bar felt suddenly smaller, the walls pressing in around David. If what Marcus said was true, then Emily's downfall wasn't just karma. It was a reckoning, and by being tangled in her collapse, David might have put himself on the warden's radar too. Why both of us? David asked quietly. Why would she say it's over for me too? Marcus lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke in slow, deliberate rings. Because you were her favorite project. Everybody knew it. She didn't just torture you, she obsessed over you. And if the warden thinks you're part of her mess, then yeah, man, you're done. David's pulse hammered in his ears. The room felt hotter, the smoke thicker. He clenched his fists around the scraps of paper, realizing that Emily's warning wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was a death sentence wrapped in 3 simple words. He's coming back. And the moment he does, neither of them will be safe. David learns from a former inmate that he refers to the warden, a shadowy figure who once controlled the prison from behind the scenes. Emily betrayed him, and now he's returning. If Emily's words are true, David is tied to her fate, and the warden's revenge. David couldn't sleep that night. He sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the notes Emily left behind, the words carved into his thoughts like scars he couldn't erase. He's coming back. He remembered Marcus's voice, low and steady, telling him about the man they called the warden. Not the official one in the uniform, but a ghost who pulled strings from the shadows, controlling guards, intimidating officers, bending rules until justice no longer existed. And now, he was coming back. The following morning, David walked through his neighborhood in downtown Detroit, the sun just rising over the rooftops. For the first time since leaving prison, the streets didn't feel safe. Every passing car, every stranger lingering too long on a corner, felt like a threat. At the corner store, he picked up a newspaper, but his eyes weren't on the headlines. They drifted to the faces around him, searching for anything unusual. That's when he noticed a black SUV idling across the street, its tinted windows masking whoever sat inside. It didn't move. Not when he stepped into the store. Not when he stepped out. The hair on his neck stood on end. By noon, David decided he needed answers from someone who knew more than Marcus. There was only one person he could think of, Detective Harris, a cop who'd quietly hinted at corruption inside Ravenhill Prison years ago. Harris had been one of the few officers David believed still had a conscience. When David found him at the precinct, Harris looked worn down, his tie crooked, his eyes tired. But the moment David mentioned Emily's disappearance and the warden's name, the detective stiffened. "Where did you hear that?" Harris asked, his voice sharp. "From someone who lived through it," David said. "I need to know what's going on. Why is Emily terrified of this man? And why would she say I'm in danger too?" Harris leaned back, rubbing his temples. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he said, "Because the warden doesn't leave loose ends. If Emily's involved, and if she had any kind of obsession with you, then you're not a bystander. You're part of the story now. And that makes you a target." The weight of those words sank into David's chest like a stone. A target. He thought he'd escaped when the prison gates closed behind him for the last time. But now he realized he was still trapped. Only this time, The walls weren't concrete and steel. They were invisible, built from threats and fear, stretching across every street he walked. That night, David returned home to find his front door slightly ajar. His stomach dropped. He never left it unlocked. Slowly, cautiously, he pushed it open. The living room was dark, shadows stretching across the floor. Everything looked normal, until he saw it. On the coffee table sat a single playing card, the King of Spades. David froze. He hadn't touched a deck of cards in months. He picked it up, and on the back, written in thick black ink, were the words, "Welcome home, David." His hands trembled. Someone had been here. Someone had walked into his home, left this card, and walked back out like they owned the place. The warden's return wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real. The next day, David met Marcus again at the bar, slamming the card down on the table. Marcus's face went pale. "That's his calling card. You don't get one of those unless he wants you to know he's watching." David's jaw tightened. "Then what does he want from me?" Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "Not what, who. He wants Emily. And if he thinks you can lead him to her, he'll use you until she's found. After that." He let the silence speak for itself. The revelation cut deep. Emily, the woman who once tormented him, was now the only thing standing between him and a man who could destroy him. She had vanished into the night, leaving nothing but notes and fear in her wake. But whether he liked it or not, David realized he needed to find her. Because if he didn't, the warden would. The tension boiled over days later when David returned home to find a stranger sitting calmly on his porch. The man wore a tailored suit, his hair slicked back and his smile too calm for comfort. "You're David, right?" the man said, his voice silky but firm. "I was told you might know how to find an old friend of ours. Emily Carter." David's throat went dry. "Who are you?" The man chuckled softly, tapping the armrest of the chair he sat in. "Let's just say, I represent interests that want her back where she belongs, and you, whether you realize it or not, are going to help us." Before David could reply, the man stood, adjusted his cufflinks and walked away, slipping into the black SUV that had been haunting his street. David's chest heaved as he watched the car disappear. He was in the game now. No choice, no escape. He slammed the door shut behind him, the King of Spades still burning in his hand, and whispered to himself, "Emily, where the hell are you?" David is marked as a target. The warden's people have already found him and are pressuring him to lead them to Emily. With nowhere to run and no one to trust, David realizes his only chance of survival is to find the very woman who once destroyed his life. If you were David, would you try to find Emily and hand her over to the warden just to save yourself? Or would you risk everything to protect the woman who once tortured you? The week crawled by like a nightmare David couldn't wake from. The black SUV appeared on random streets near his apartment, sometimes idling for hours, sometimes vanishing before he could even blink. The King of Spades sat on his nightstand, a reminder that his life was no longer his own. But it wasn't just the warden's men watching him. David had started noticing other signs, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, footsteps behind him that stopped when he turned, phone calls that went silent the moment he answered. The noose was tightening, and through it all, one question haunted him. Where is Emily Carter? The answer came on a rainy Thursday night. David was driving back from Marcus's bar, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, when his headlights caught a figure standing in the middle of the road. The rain poured down in sheets, but the person didn't move, didn't flinch. David slammed the brakes. The tires screeched against wet asphalt, the car skidding to a stop just feet from the figure. His heart pounded as he squinted through the rain-soaked windshield. It was her, Emily Carter. She looked nothing like the officer who once towered over him in Ravenhill. Her hair was matted, her clothes soaked, and her face hollow, worn from fear and sickness. But her eyes, those sharp, unforgiving eyes, were still the same. David rolled down the window, his voice tight. Get in, before someone sees you. For a second, she hesitated. Then, without a word, Emily pulled the passenger door open and slipped inside, shivering from the cold. The air between them was thick, heavy with everything unspoken. They drove in silence for miles, the only sound the rhythm of rain against the roof. Finally, David pulled into an empty lot by the river, killed the engine, and turned to face her. "You disappeared," he said flatly. "The hospital said you just vanished." Emily's lips trembled before she spoke. "I had to. They were coming for me. If I stayed, they'd have killed me in that bed." David's jaw tightened. "Who's they? The warden's men?" Her eyes flicked to him, filled with fear. "You don't understand. He's not just a man. He's a system, a shadow that stretches further than Ravenhill. The warden doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." David clenched his fists. "Then why drag me into this? You tortured me for years. You made me beg for mercy, and now you're telling me I'm marked because of you?" Her voice cracked. "Because I couldn't stop. You were different. You fought back. You made me feel something I wasn't supposed to feel." And he saw it. He saw me hesitate with you. That's why you're on his list, because he thinks I chose you over him. David's chest tightened, anger clashing with disbelief. He wanted to scream at her, throw her out of the car, leave her in the rain. But beneath the fury was something else, an unsettling realization. Emily Carter, the woman who once treated him like less than human, was now confessing she was human too. David leaned closer. "So what now? You show up out of nowhere, dump your mess in my lap, and expect me to protect you?" Emily's eyes glistened. "I don't expect protection. I expect the truth. You need to know what's coming. And you need to decide if you're strong enough to face it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. Her hand shook as she placed it on the dashboard. David stared. It was a picture of Emily and a man he didn't recognize. Broad-shouldered, stern-faced, dressed in a prison guard's uniform. The man's arm was around her, but there was nothing warm about it. "That's him," Emily whispered. "The warden. Not his real name, of course. But that's what they called him inside. He was everything. Power, fear, control. I thought I could outsmart him. I was wrong." David picked up the photo, his stomach twisting. "Why show me this? What do you want from me?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Because he's here, in this city, and if we don't stop him, neither of us will live to see another sunrise." The words hit David like a punch to the chest. He gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing. For years he had fantasized about revenge, about seeing Emily broken, helpless, begging for the mercy she once denied him. And now, here she was, fragile and terrified, depending on him. It was justice. It was irony. It was a trap. And he didn't know which choice would destroy him faster, turning his back on her or standing by her side. Before he could speak, the sound of an engine echoed in the distance. Headlights cut through the rain, growing closer, brighter. Emily's face drained of color. "They found us," she whispered. David turned the key, the car roaring back to life. He slammed the gear shift into drive as the SUV pulled into the lot, blocking the exit. Emily grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Don't let them take me. Please, David, not him." For a split second, their eyes locked. The prisoner and the officer, the broken and the breaker, bound by a fate neither could escape. Then the SUV's doors opened. Figures in black stepped out, rain glinting off their shoulders. The warden's men had arrived. Emily finally reappears, fragile and desperate, confessing her past ties to the warden and her obsession with David. Just as she reveals that the warden is in the city, his men corner them in the empty lot, leaving David with no way out. If you were in David's place, would you hit the gas and try to escape with Emily? Or push her out of the car and hand her over to the people hunting her? The night air was sharp, filled with the scent of damp asphalt and faint smoke from the city's industrial district. Jack's boots struck the ground in hurried rhythm as he pulled Emily along, her breaths shallow and ragged. Behind them, the sound of engines revving to life shattered the silence. "They're coming," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jack didn't waste words. He only tightened his grip and veered into the shadow of an alley. The neon glow from a liquor store sign flickered overhead, casting fractured light across graffiti-stained walls. They pressed themselves against the cold brick, listening. A black SUV rolled by slowly, its tinted windows like watchful eyes. Inside, dark silhouettes shifted. The warden's men. Jack felt Emily shiver against him. He leaned close, whispering, "Stay quiet. Just breathe with me." The SUV paused at the mouth of the alley. Time slowed. Jack's heart thundered in his chest like a war drum. He remembered the warden's face the night he last saw him, a smile stretched too wide, hiding cruelty beneath. That same man was now hunting them. The SUV moved on. Jack exhaled. "Move," he urged. They darted deeper into the alley, weaving between trash cans and broken pallets, but the reprieve was short. Another engine roared from the opposite end. Headlights burst into the alley, blinding them. "Run!" Jack yelled. Emily didn't hesitate. She sprinted beside him, her hair whipping back as the SUV barreled forward, closing the gap. Jack vaulted a fence and caught her hand, yanking her up with every ounce of strength he had. The metal rattled violently as the vehicle screeched to a stop on the other side. The two dropped into another street, their landing hard. Pain shot through Jack's knees, but adrenaline kept him moving. Sirens wailed in the distance, not police, but the warden's false alarms designed to box them in. He controlled the city's shadows, and Jack knew it. Emily stumbled. Jack caught her before she fell. "Keep going," he urged. They ran past shuttered storefronts and into a construction site, skeletal steel beams rising like giant ribs against the sky. Floodlights clicked on one by one. A voice echoed from a loudspeaker, smooth, confident, unnervingly calm. "Jack, Emily, you can't hide forever." The warden. Emily froze, terror written across her face. "He's here." "No, he's watching us," Jack corrected, scanning the site. The voice bounced around the steel, impossible to pin down. Shadows moved above them, 3, maybe 4 figures. The warden's men. Jack spotted a narrow staircase and pulled Emily toward it. They raced up the scaffolding as footsteps thundered below. "Faster!" he hissed. Gunfire cracked. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off steel beams. Emily screamed, clutching Jack's arm. "Down!" Jack shoved her behind a pillar, shielding her with his body. He felt the hot sting of metal fragments graze his cheek. They couldn't stay pinned. Not here. Not now. Jack's eyes darted upward. A crane loomed above them, its cabin dangling by cables. "We climb," he said. Emily stared at him wide-eyed. "Are you insane?" "Probably," Jack admitted, hauling her upward. They scrambled up the beams, hands slipping on cold steel, breaths ragged. Below, shadows fanned out, methodical, relentless. The warden's men didn't rush. They herded, like wolves pushing prey into the open. By the time Jack and Emily reached the crane's cabin, their limbs burned. Emily collapsed inside, trembling. Jack slammed the door shut and pulled the lever. The crane groaned, lurching forward. The long arm swung across the site, creaking ominously. From the ground, flashlights tracked them. Shots rang out, shattering glass. Emily screamed, ducking as shards rained down. Jack grabbed the intercom. "You wanted me, Warden? Come and get me." For a moment, silence. Then, laughter crackled through the site's speakers. "Oh, Jack, you still don't understand. This isn't about catching you. It's about breaking you. And she..." The voice lingered with venom. "She's the key." Emily's breath hitched. Jack's stomach twisted. "Ignore him," he said quickly. But Emily's eyes, wide, scared, searching, told him she couldn't. The crane jerked suddenly. Jack glanced down and saw men cutting at the base controls. They weren't just hunting. They were dismantling his escape. The cabin lurched violently, swinging them out over the street. The city lights blurred beneath them, dizzying, endless. Emily clung to Jack, sobbing. "They'll kill us." "No," Jack muttered, pulling her close. "Not tonight." The crane tilted further, cables groaning. Jack's eyes darted to the nearby rooftop, barely 30 feet away, a gap that meant either salvation or death. He locked eyes with Emily. "Do you trust me?" Tears streamed down her face. She nodded, though fear made her lips tremble. "Then jump." The cabin groaned again. The cables screamed like dying animals. Below, the warden's men shouted, waiting for the fall. Jack braced himself, gripping Emily's hand so tightly her bones might snap. 1, 2. The crane shuddered, bolts popping loose. 3! They leapt. The night exploded into wind and weightlessness. For a heartbeat, Jack felt like they were flying, two broken souls defying the warden's control. But the rooftop rushed up fast, merciless. They hit hard. Jack rolled, pain ripping through his side. Emily cried out, landing beside him. They both gasped, alive, but battered. Behind them, the crane collapsed with a deafening crash, sending sparks and steel into the streets below. The men cursed and scattered. Jack staggered to his feet, dragging Emily upright. "Come on, we're not safe yet." They stumbled across the rooftop, smoke rising in the distance, sirens wailing. The city felt like it was closing in around them. Every shadow, every alley, every breath belonging to the warden. Emily clutched Jack's arm, eyes filled with terror and defiance. "He won't stop, Jack. He'll never stop." Jack nodded grimly. "Then we make our stand." The rooftop door burst open. A figure stepped through. Tall, cold, familiar. The warden himself. Jack froze. Emily's scream tore through the night. If you were Jack, standing face to face with the warden at last, would you fight to the death right there or keep running to protect Emily at all costs? The night sky hung heavy with smoke and city light, a distorted canvas above the rooftop. Jack's lungs burned from the chase, but every nerve in his body came alive the instant the rooftop door slammed open. The warden emerged. Tall, broad, wrapped in a black trench coat that swayed with the wind. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a predator finally cornering its prey. Behind him, two of his men flanked the doorway, but the warden raised a single hand. They froze. "This one," he said, his voice carrying easily over the rooftop, "is between him and me." Emily's grip on Jack's arm tightened. Her pulse hammered through her trembling fingers. "Jack, don't do this. We can find another way." Jack shook his head. His jaw clenched, eyes locked on the man who had once orchestrated every torment of his imprisonment. "There is no other way." The warden smiled thinly, stepping forward into the wash of the rooftop lights. "I've waited for this. Do you know how many nights I pictured you broken, crawling back to me, begging for release?" He chuckled. "And yet, here you are, still running, still thinking you're a hero." Jack stepped forward, shielding Emily behind him. "I'm not the one who's afraid of facing the truth." "The truth?" The warden's voice sharpened, his smile gone. "The truth is you're nothing. A prisoner who should have stayed forgotten. You and the woman you cling to like a shield." His eyes cut to Emily, icy and deliberate. "Are just reminders of your failure." Emily gasped softly. Jack's blood surged. He tore his gaze from the warden only long enough to whisper to her, "Stay low. Don't move unless I say." She nodded, her tears glinting in the rooftop's pale glow. The warden shrugged off his coat, revealing the solid bulk beneath, a body built from years of control, power, and cruelty. His fists were like iron. "Come then," he invited, arms spread wide. "Let's finish what started in those prison walls." Jack didn't hesitate. He charged. Their bodies collided with the force of rage and history. Fists cracked against ribs, against jaws, against bone. Jack grunted as the warden's punch smashed into his side, nearly doubling him. but he responded with a brutal hook to the warden's face, snapping his head sideways. Emily screamed. "Stay back!" Jack barked even as he stumbled, catching himself on a rooftop vent. The warden spat blood, laughing through the crimson. "You fight better when you're desperate, Jack. I like it." He came forward again, relentless, his fists raining blows like sledgehammers. Jack absorbed 1, 2, 3 strikes before finding an opening. He drove his knee into the warden's gut, followed by a desperate elbow to the side of his head. The warden staggered, but not for long. With a roar, the warden grabbed Jack by the throat and lifted him off his feet. Jack clawed at his iron grip, his vision blurring as oxygen drained. "You can't win," the warden snarled, his face inches away, hot breath reeking of blood and rage. "I own this city. I own your fear." Jack's hand fumbled against his belt. His fingers closed around a piece of twisted rebar he'd picked up earlier at the construction site. With the last ounce of strength, he drove it into the warden's side. The warden howled, dropping him. Jack collapsed, gasping, his chest heaving like a drowning man. Emily crawled forward, sobbing. "Jack, get up!" But the warden wasn't finished. He ripped the rebar from his side, blood seeping through his shirt, and hurled it aside. His rage seemed to fuel him, stronger than pain. "You'll watch her die," he growled, stepping toward Emily. Jack's eyes widened. He forced himself up, every muscle screaming. "No!" He tackled the warden from behind, driving them both to the rooftop's edge. Their bodies skidded dangerously close to the drop, the city yawning hundreds of feet below. They grappled viciously, each punch echoing like thunder. The warden's fists slammed into Jack's ribs, but Jack clawed, bit, and fought like a man with nothing left to lose. Emily screamed from behind them. "Stop, please stop." Neither man heard her. Jack landed a brutal punch to the warden's jaw. The warden retaliated with a crushing headbutt that sent Jack's vision spinning. Blood poured from Jack's nose. He staggered, teetering near the ledge. The warden advanced, raising his fists for the final blow. "This ends with you broken, Jack." "Just like I promised." Jack wiped the blood from his mouth, glaring. "No, this ends with me free." He lunged forward, ramming his shoulder into the warden's chest. Both men toppled toward the ledge, their boots scraping desperately for traction. The world slowed. Emily screamed his name. The warden's hand shot out, grabbing Jack's collar as they struggled against gravity. One wrong move, and both would plunge to their deaths. Jack locked eyes with him, breathing hard, every fiber of his being trembling. "If I go down, you're coming with me." The warden's grin returned, cruel even through bloodied lips. "Then let's fall together." Jack twisted violently, shoving his elbow into the warden's wounded side. The warden roared, his grip faltering. Jack seized the moment, slamming his forehead into the warden's face with a bone-cracking thud. The warden reeled backward, and suddenly, he was gone. Emily screamed as the warden's body tumbled into the abyss, swallowed by the city below. The impact never reached their ears. The roar of the night drowned it. Silence fell. Jack collapsed to his knees, gasping, his body trembling with exhaustion and disbelief. Emily rushed forward, wrapping her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "You did it," she whispered. "It's over." Jack's arms tightened around her, though his eyes remained fixed on the ledge. His breath came uneven, doubt gnawing at him. The warden had fallen, but in Jack's gut he felt it. This wasn't over. Not yet. As the night wind howled across the rooftop, Jack whispered to himself, "He's not the kind of man who dies so easily." The warden's body has vanished into the city, but was it truly the end, or the beginning of something darker? Do you think the warden really died in that fall? Or is he planning something even more terrifying from the shadows? The rooftop was quiet now, eerily so, as if the fight had drained the city of sound. Jack's body shook with exhaustion, his chest rising and falling in ragged waves. Emily clung to him, her face buried against his shoulder, her tears mixing with his blood. For a moment, the world stood still. "Is it really over?" she whispered, her voice small and fragile. Jack pulled back, brushing her hair away from her face. His lips parted to answer, but no words came. His eyes drifted toward the ledge, to the empty space where the warden had fallen. He searched the darkness below, waiting for the certainty that never arrived. No sirens, no shouts from the street. No impact, just silence. "I don't know," Jack admitted softly. Emily shivered. "Then we have to leave, before anyone comes." Together they staggered off the rooftop, down the fire escape, and into the shadows of the alley. Jack's ribs ached with every step, his shirt torn and soaked with sweat and blood. Emily held him upright, her smaller frame shaking under his weight, but her will carried them both. The safe house. They found shelter in an old safe house, a crumbling apartment one of Jack's old friends had once used when things went bad. The windows were boarded, the lights dim, but to them, it was sanctuary. Emily cleaned his wounds with trembling hands, her touch both gentle and firm. Jack hissed as she pressed cloth against his bruised ribs. "You should be in a hospital," she muttered. Jack shook his head. "Too dangerous. If the warden's men are still out there, they'll be watching." Her eyes hardened. "Then what are we supposed to do? Just hide?" Jack didn't answer. He lay back against the wall, staring at the cracked ceiling, his mind replaying the rooftop fight over and over. The warden's laugh still rang in his ears, the way his grip had tightened at the edge, the way he'd whispered, "Then let's fall together." Jack shut his eyes, but the memory wouldn't let him rest. The news. By morning, Emily found a small radio tucked in one of the drawers. She fiddled with it until the static gave way to a local station. Police were called late last night after multiple reports of a disturbance near 9th and Grove. Witnesses claimed they heard shouting and possible gunfire, though no arrests have been made. Authorities say no body was recovered. Emily's hand froze on the dial. Her eyes darted to Jack. "No body?" she whispered. Jack sat up, pain forgotten. His jaw tightened. "I knew it." Emily shook her head, fear flooding her features. "Jack, maybe it was too dark. Maybe they just haven't found him yet." But Jack wasn't convinced. He stood, pacing the room despite his injuries. "No, he's alive. I felt it when I let go. The warden doesn't die easy. He's out there and he's not finished." Emily's voice cracked. "Then what do we do? Run forever?" Jack stopped, staring out the narrow crack of the boarded window. "We don't run. Not anymore. If he's alive, he'll come for us. And when he does," his hands curled into fists, "we'll be ready." The sign. That night, Jack woke to the sound of a faint scratching at the door. He grabbed the nearest object, a broken pipe, and motioned Emily to stay quiet. Heart pounding, he crept toward the sound. The scratching stopped. Jack swung the door open. Nothing. The hallway was empty, the silence pressing against his ears. But as he turned back, something caught his eye. A folded piece of paper had been slid beneath the door. Jack picked it up, his stomach sinking. Scrawled in sharp, jagged letters were 3 chilling words. "I never fall." Emily gasped as she read over his shoulder, her face draining of color. No. No, it can't be. Jack crushed the note in his fist, his breath harsh and ragged. The warden wasn't just alive, he was watching. The Saigon of fear. The room grew smaller, the air heavier. Emily sat on the edge of the mattress, hugging herself, her eyes darting to every shadow. "He knows where we are. Jack, what if he's already here?" Jack placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, though his own fear threatened to consume him. "That's what he wants, to break us before he strikes, but we can't give him that." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I can't go through this again. I thought we were free. I thought it was over." Jack knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "It's not over. Not yet. But listen to me. He doesn't own us anymore. Not me. Not you. We fight back this time." Emily swallowed hard, nodding through her tears. But as Jack turned away, His own doubt gnawed at him. The warden had cheated death once. How many times could they really win? The safe house was quiet, but Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, gripping the crumpled note, watching the streets below for any sign of movement. The city seemed normal. Cars passing, people walking. But in every corner, in every shadow, Jack swore he could feel the warden's eyes. And then, just before dawn, a single black car rolled slowly past the building. Its tinted windows reflected the rising sun. Jack's pulse spiked. Emily stirred behind him. "What is it?" Jack didn't answer. He only whispered to himself, voice cold and certain. "He's coming. The warden has survived. He knows where they are, and his game has just begun. If you were in Jack and Emily's position, would you keep hiding, or take the fight to the warden before he strikes first?" The note still sat on the table, crumpled and stained with Jack's blood. "I never fall." Those words haunted the air of the safe house like smoke. But instead of breaking him, they hardened him. And Jack stood at the window watching the world outside move on as if nothing had happened. People carried groceries, kids rode bikes, taxis honked. Normal life continued while his and Emily's world balanced on a knife's edge. "This ends now," Jack finally said, his voice steady. "No more hiding, no more waiting." Emily looked up, her face pale but resolute. "What do we do?" Jack turned to her. "We prepare." The training. The days that followed were grueling. Jack pushed his body despite the bruises and cracked ribs. Every morning he forced himself through punishing exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, shadowboxing, turning pain into fuel. Emily trained beside him, learning how to strike, block, and fight back. At first her movements were clumsy, her fists too soft, but Jack was patient. "Again," he'd say, correcting her stance. "Put everything into it. You're not just fighting him, you're fighting fear." By the third day, her punches landed harder. By the fifth, her eyes carried fire instead of panic. At night, Jack taught her how to handle a weapon. He scavenged an old pistol from a contact he trusted and showed her how to load, aim, and shoot. Emily's hands trembled the first time she pulled the trigger at the rusted cans they used as targets. But when the can toppled, her face lit with a grim kind of pride. "I can do this," she whispered. Jack nodded. "Yes, you can." The trap's training wasn't enough. Jack knew the warden would come for them on his own terms. To survive, they had to control the ground. Using scraps from the crumbling building, broken glass, chains, even pieces of furniture, they began setting traps throughout the safe house. Emily spread nails across the stairwells, covering them with old rags. Jack rigged doors with makeshift alarms, so even the slightest movement would rattle bottles or snap cords. "Paranoid?" Emily asked one night, watching him twist wire into a snare at the window. Jack gave her a hard look. "Paranoia keeps you alive." She didn't argue. The allies. But Jack also knew something else. No matter how strong they became, no matter how many traps they set, the warden was too powerful to face alone. So he reached out. Old prison contacts. Men he had once protected inside. Men who owed him favors. A few were skeptical. Others refused outright. But two came. Marcus, a wiry ex-inmate with eyes too old for his age, arrived first. "I heard what he did to you," Marcus said, "and I hate him as much as you do." Then came Reggie, big and broad, with a limp that didn't stop him from carrying a shotgun under his coat. "The warden ruined my brother's life. You say the word, and I'll stand with you." Emily eyed them both nervously, but Jack's nod reassured her. "They're with us," he said, "and we need every hand we can get." The bond. Between the long nights and harder days, something shifted between Jack and Emily. When she stumbled during training, he caught her, holding her longer than necessary. When his ribs hurt too much to keep going, she pressed her hand over them, whispering, "Rest. You don't have to carry this alone." Jack looked at her then, really looked, past the fear, past the exhaustion, to the courage that had grown inside her since the day they'd met again in that hospital room. "You've changed," he said softly. Emily smiled faintly. "You gave me a reason to." Their bond didn't erase the fear or the scars, but it gave them something stronger than either. Hope. The signal one evening, while Emily and Marcus were testing one of the alarms, a faint buzz rattled the table. Jack frowned. It was an old burner phone he hadn't touched in months. He picked it up. Static filled the line, then a distorted voice. "You think you can prepare for me?" Jack froze. Emily looked up, sensing the tension. The voice chuckled. "I told you before. You can't win. You can build your traps, train your girl, gather your strays. None of it matters." Jack's grip tightened on the phone. "Where are you?" The warden's voice grew sharper. "Closer than you think." The line went dead. The night before. The safe house buzzed with restless energy that night. Marcus checked his knife over and over. Reggie loaded shells into his shotgun, the sound echoing in the cramped space. Emily cleaned the pistol with hands steadier than ever before. Jack watched them, his chest heavy with both dread and determination. He knew the warden wasn't bluffing. The storm was coming. Later, when the others slept, Emily found Jack standing by the boarded window. She slid her hand into his, silent at first. Then she whispered, "Do you think we'll survive this?" Jack didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the city lights in the distance. Finally, he turned to her, his voice low but fierce. "I don't know, but I swear this. He will never own us again." Emily nodded, leaning against him. Together they stood in the dark, listening to the quiet before the battle. Just before dawn, Jack checked the traps one last time. Everything was in place. Everyone was ready. And then, a single knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. Jack froze. Emily's breath hitched behind him. Marcus reached for his knife. Reggie cocked his shotgun. The knock came again. Jack's voice was steady, though his heart raced. "He's here. The warden has found them, and the final confrontation is seconds away. If you were standing in that safe house with Jack, Emily, and their allies, would you open the door and face him head-on, or wait for the warden to make the first move?" The night was quiet. Too quiet. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the street lamp bleeding through the blinds. Jack stood near the window, his shoulders tense, his hand resting on the pistol holstered at his side. They had spent weeks preparing, training, gathering weapons, setting traps throughout the safe house. Every door rigged with alarms, every window reinforced, every hallway mapped out in case they needed to retreat. But in the silence of the night, all their work felt like sand castles against a tidal wave. Emily broke the silence. "Do you think he's really coming tonight?" Jack's jaw tightened. "He's coming. I can feel it." And then it began. The first explosion shattered the stillness. A pipe bomb tossed through the back alley window. The blast rocked the safe house, sending glass and dust raining down. Sirens blared as the alarms tripped. The war had arrived. Emily and Jack sprinted into the hallway just as the front door was kicked open. The warden's men, dressed in black, armed to the teeth, poured in like a flood of shadows. Their boots thundered against the wood floors, their rifles spitting fire. Jack dropped to one knee, firing back with brutal precision. Two men fell instantly. Emily ducked behind an overturned table, her shotgun booming as pellets tore through the smoke. She wasn't the same woman who once cowered in fear. She fought like someone who had decided this was the last night she would ever run. But the warden was nowhere to be seen. The battle raged through every room of the safe house. Traps snapped, gas bombs hissed, hidden wires detonated charges that blew holes through walls. The house itself became a war zone. Yet still, for every one of the warden's soldiers who fell, two more seemed to appear. Finally, the air shifted. The footsteps grew heavier, and then he appeared. The warden. Dressed in black body armor, face half hidden in shadow, his presence filled the burning hallway like a storm. His voice was low, taunting. "You thought you could run. You thought you could hide. But the cage always wins. Jack stepped forward, gun raised. Tonight, the cage breaks. The warden laughed, deep, guttural. Then he moved, faster than either of them expected. He fired first, grazing Jack's arm, sending him stumbling back. Emily screamed, unloading a shotgun blast that tore into the wall just inches from the warden's chest. He didn't flinch. The three of them clashed in a storm of gunfire, smoke, and blood. Furniture splintered, glass shattered, the entire safe house trembling under the weight of their violence. At last, Emily was pinned. The warden's hand gripped her throat, lifting her against the wall. She kicked and clawed, her vision blurring. Jack, bleeding, barely able to stand, raised his pistol. His hand shook, his vision swam, but he had one clean shot. The warden turned, sneering. "You won't kill me. You never had the strength." Jack pulled the trigger. The bullet struck between the warden's eyes. Time seemed to stop. His body went rigid, his grip on Emily loosening. Slowly, impossibly, he staggered backward, crashing into the flaming wreckage of the living room. His body collapsed into the fire, swallowed by smoke and flames. Emily gasped for air, falling into Jack's arms. Both of them were shaking, bloodied, broken, but alive. They stumbled out into the night as the safe house burned behind them, fire devouring everything they had built. The city skyline glowed in the distance. Sirens wailed, but the night was theirs, or so they thought. Because as the fire raged, unseen by them, a single hand clawed free from the wreckage, blackened, burned, but moving. The warden wasn't finished. Jack and Emily survived the war, but the monster they fought may still be alive. Do you think the warden truly survived the flames, or was that just the last flicker of his shadow in their minds? If you made it this far, you're officially part of this story's journey. Do you think the warden is really gone, or is he still out there plotting his revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And hey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next dark story we bring to life. Your support keeps this channel alive. And trust me, the next tale will be even more chilling.